Yes, thank you for being so keen to come back for another Patreon episode of the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. Although we could probably just call Patreon, a history of rock and roll and rock and roll and rock and roll, because I don't do a whole lot of film stuff on it. Last episode being a nice exception with a little of the old 1982 era Penelope Spheris perspective on things, and that'll pop up, I'm sure, in future episodes. Not her necessarily, but other cool interviews with filmmakers that did rock and roll stuff. If I can't, force it into a future episode that relates to an artist I want to join that with, but today, it's going to be another fun mixed bag of stuff, and I will start it with another entry from this library book I have to take back very, very soon called 150 Glimpses of the Beatles by Craig Brown. This is from chapter 17, entitled 5 More Postcards from Hamburg. And each section is just, numeralized from 1 to 5. So get ready. If there's anyone nearby that does not like to hear stories about excretionary issuances coming from maybe one of their favorite Beatles and how long that issuance remained in the life of the Beatles, cover their ears. I mean, why are you with them anyway? Doesn't that turn everybody on? Number 1, on their second stint in Hamburg, the Beatles are working at a new venue, the Star Club, for a new manager, Manfred Weisleder, at new lodgings. A lovely, clean flat in the Grosse Freiheit. Sorry, Americans can't help but go, Freiheit, Freiheit. It's probably something more aggressive. Freiheit. Freiheit. Yeah, there's no R in there. I totally mispronounced it. Freiheit. Goodness, I've already made such a fool of myself. Herr Weisleder tacks on one condition, though. I always want you should enjoy yourselves in the Star Club. But if you make shit, I send you home. You notice I didn't do that in an over-the-top German. I didn't do it in any kind of German accent because now I'm insecure and I'm self-shaming as a filthy American that doesn't know how to do European accents or any other accents without them sounding offensive. Within days, George has been sick on the floor by the side of his bed. The next morning, the unshapely pool is still there, glowering back at him. The cleaning lady refuses to clear it up, arguing, not unreasonably, that it is not part of her duties. For reasons of his own, George refuses to dispose of it. He has always had this stubborn streak. 2. The next day, the pool remains doggedly present. The cleaning lady grumbles at the Beatles' general squalor, the smelly socks, the empty bottles, the clothes strewn all over the place. This latest infraction takes their misdemeanors to another level. She goes straight to Herr Weisleder and voices her complaints. Herr Weisleder lends a sympathetic ear. He will take a closer look. Number 3. That's the German 3. Having examined the evidence, for everyone that just got a shot in their head of that one little hand movement from Inglourious Bastards, that was for you. This is German 3. Having examined the evidence, Herr Weisleder rules against George charging his henchman and bouncer, Horst Fascher, the job of forcing him to clean it up. Fascher is a former championship boxer. He has also spent time in prison for manslaughter, following a fracas with a sailor. Only the bravest of souls refused to obey him. John has already fallen foul of him. When John called him a Nazi, Herr Fascher retaliated by marching him to the toilet and urinating over him. But George, stubborn George, continues to put his foot down. Or his foos. Or if not down, at least to one side. Get it? Because he's got to wake up every morning and get out of bed and not step in the puddle of puke. No, he says, he is definitely not going to clear it up. Why should he? It isn't his job. For all he cares, it can just stay there. When he needs to get in or out of bed, he simply climbs over it. Number 4. The dispute has reached an impasse. The cleaning lady will not clean up the pool of vomit, nor will George. Over the next few days, Pete Best observes its sluggish, odoriferous progress with morbid fascination, watching it grow and grow, mushrooming and taking on a life of its own. Cigarettes were crushed in it, bits of food fed to it, until it assumed the look of a hedgehog. The Beatles christen it The Thing, and treat it almost like a family pet. Before long, The Thing acquires a local reputation. Pete remembers how its fame spread. People wanted to come and see it. He estimates it measures roughly 6 inches in diameter, and it keeps growing upwards, like a miniature flower garden. As it blossoms, George harbors scary thoughts. I'm frightened to sleep in case it eats me, he confesses. 5. One morning, Herr Fascher pays a return visit, unannounced. He takes one look at the aging vomit before deciding that enough is enough. He returns with a shovel. Don't do it! That's our pet! Yell the Beatles, but their pleas fall on deaf ears. Fascher scoops it up and transports it down the stairs, through the front door, and onto the Grosse Freiheit. The Beatles follow in a mock funeral procession. Fascher finds a bin on the street and tips the thing into it. As for George, he feels he has won a small but significant victory. He kept his word and refused to back down. Honor has been served.
Please remember to replace the speaker on the post when you leave the theater.
Right. Now, let's go back to Bowie. The Man Who Sold the World, Dave Bowie, and the 1970s by Peter Doggett. There was choice selections read from this previously. I want to focus in on 2 songs that I think are just the entries in the book were cool, sort of not just stylistic breakdowns, but there was some good musical details here that aren't too technical for the average non-musical person, player, non-musician type of fella. And if you like David Bowie, you'll probably dig it. If you don't care about David Bowie, it's still interesting from a musical perspective and from a rock history perspective. The songs to focus on are Starman and Rock and Roll Suicide. Now it says, Starman was recorded February 1972, Ziggy Stardust LP. If Bowie was indeed the actor, as he claimed on Hunky Dory, then this was his finest performance. It was also a triumph of the techniques he had learned in advertising. From its marketing on BBC's Top of the Pops to his assumption of superstar status on the back on what was, after all, only a number 10 success in Britain and a number 65 damp squib in America, where it was killed by Elton John's Rocket Man, itself little more than an imitation of Space Oddity. That's a bit of an accusation. I don't know if I'd ever thought about it that way, but what do I know? What do I know? Even before Ziggy Stardust was released, Starman was a blatant exploitation of an album and an image to which it was largely peripheral. Ultimately, it was simply, like Space Oddity before it, a space-age novelty hit. And the fact that Bowie dropped it from his live set as early as he could hinted that it was too calculated a move, even for this evangelist of self-recreation. But Starman was something else. A superbly constructed pop song. Bowie made no attempt to hide the fact that the octave jump in the chorus, Starman, mirrored the rise in Judy Garland's Over the Rainbow, Somewhere. He even combined the 2 melodies in a showcase London performance. But whereas the Garland song used its cathartic rise to introduce a refrain that was emotionally and melodically expansive. The leap in Bowie's song was followed by a more uncertain melody, reflecting his character's innate lack of confidence. All around the Starman, however, his presence evoked anticipation. The link between the verse and the chorus was the guitar figure from the Supremes' You Keep Me Hanging On. And then joyous relief when he commanded the children to boogie, and Mick Ronson's guitar led the Spiders through a relaxed swagger, through territory that Mark Bolan, the prince of cosmic jive, would have recognized as his home turf. Which begs the question, was Starman like Lady Stardust another song written with Bolan in mind? If so, it was a tribute that worked as a palace coup. The wordless chorus that brought Starman to its fade was interpreted by Bolan as a steal from his 1971 hit Hot Love. The tentative opening chords, the subdominant chord followed by the major seventh of the root, were played out on a 12-string acoustic that was echoed across the stereo channels and answered by the occasional strum of a 6-string, until the Starman and the verse arrived and the guitar was crammed back into a single speaker. Ronson only introduced his electric guitar for the heavily phased radio signal from space and to prove that we hadn't really strayed very far from Kansas after all. A warmly romantic string arrangement carried us through the chorus. Only when the band obeyed the instruction to boogie, perfectly mimicking the T-Rex style, did a rock sensibility briefly assume the spotlight. If the Starman was going to blow our minds, it would be as a pop idol, not a rock and roller. So then Rock and Roll Suicide, the next entry, recorded February 1972, Ziggy Stardust LP, like Starman, which was designed as a hit single. Rock and Roll Suicide was meticulously designed to perform a specific role in Bowie's career. Placed at the end of Ziggy Stardust and at the end of Ziggy's final performance in 1973, it appeared to let the curtain fall on a theatrical narrative. The equation was implicit. Ziggy had allowed himself to be killed by his fans, so he was a suicide in all but deed. Now, 2 footnotes that relate to the previous paragraph I just read. First one is, one wonders whether Bowie had watched a BBC TV film called Herostratus, screened in 1967 and again in 1970. Its hero wishes to commit suicide in public and hires an advertising agency to promote the event. It's such an archetypical Bowie theme that it would be disconcerting to learn that he didn't see it. In the interest of historical accuracy, one should also note that Lou Reed claimed that Bowie had written this song for him, though whether that meant about him or for him to sing isn't clear. And the second footnote is, Bowie admitted in March 1972, just after he'd written the song, "I get worried about dying. Last month, it was being killed on stage, not here in Britain so much, in America. I know that one day a big artist is going to get killed on stage, and I know that we are going to go very big. And I keep thinking it's bound to be me." So he's saying that it's inevitable that somebody should be seeking the spotlight by murdering a rock performer or a pop singer or something, and his band is going to get really big overseas as well as in Britain, and it's probably something he needs to, be worried about. But he wouldn't have to be worried about that, obviously. Dimebag Darrell would. And I have so much info on Pantera, their history, and magazine articles and books and stuff that I want to use for the podcast. I think I might have to do it this December for my own birthday, just as a selfish, just a super selfish 6-hour episode or something. Pantera's famous for, their debut album, Cowboys from Hell, among others, of course, but that's the song that's probably most, linked with them and their identity. So I was thinking about a cowboy movie, looked it up online. Is there a movie called Cowboys from Hell yet? There surely has to have been by now, right? Turns out no, but there's a guy that has a sort of production going on, or he did about a year ago when I last looked on IMDb, and he had an Instagram account with one photo on it. He's a Texas guy. He's a big, greasy, long-haired fella. Looks pretty, looks pretty cool. He's got Joe Don Baker signed on to play one of the main roles in Cowboys from Hell. Joe Don Baker of Mitchell, obviously, and Goldeneye. You know, he played Felix Leiter he was the Felix Leiter of my high school years in the Bond franchise, among many, 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 many other performances. But none so impactful on me as Mitchell on Mystery Science Theater 3000. But the point of it all was that, like, well, I wonder if I get a hold of him, if I can reach out and interview him on the podcast as a pretense for just sort of weaseling my way into doing a Pantera episode. If he doesn't have the thing done, I don't know. If all else fails, maybe I'll just review High Plains Drifter, directed by Clint Eastwood. It's one of my favorite Eastwood films. It's a very mean-spirited movie. Not a lot of people are going to want to sort of reckon with some of the themes in it in this modern age. Of course, that's for them to decide what their comfort level is, but I love that fucking film. And he's technically a cowboy from hell, sort of, kind of. At the very least, he's a ghost, right? Oh, we'll see. Anyway, back to Rock and Roll Suicide by David Bowie. Bowie was cleverer than that, it says. As far as, Ziggy having allowed himself to be killed by his fans. Whoever was performing the song, whether it was the creation of David Jones or David Bowie, was addressing his audience and every alienated individual in that audience rather than himself. They were the victims. He reassured them, "You're not alone," begged them to stretch out their hands, let them just touch the end of his fingertips, and then abandoned them in a state of hysteria. That proclamation of union between artist and audience was never enacted with such passion as in the life of Judy Garland. Diagnosed as bipolar, she played out an incurably dramatic ritual of courtship with her fans. Her moment of suicide came with her final season at the London Palladium in January 1969, where she tested the patience of her admirers beyond sufferance by arriving on stage, if at all, hours late, to the point that they pelted her with breadsticks. She died June 6 months later, 1969, of barbiturate poisoning, having virtually ceased to eat several months earlier. Elton John connected the dots from Garland to Bowie. "I'll always remember going out for dinner with him and Angie when he was Ziggy Stardust. It was a fabulous dinner, and over dinner he admitted to me that he's always wanted to be Judy Garland, and that's the God's honest truth." Now I feel like I should read one of those old Judy Garland books. I feel like she was one of those, like one of the first big, entertainment biography expose kind of stories of you don't know what was going on behind the scenes about this very famous person that's, everyone's sweetheart. Garland's torturous example aside, the cry of "You're not alone" in Rock and Roll Suicide was borrowed from Mort Schumann's translation of the Jacques Brel song Jeff. Brel's solace for loneliness was sex. Bowie's was a show of awareness that his fans were suffering all the anguish, not English, of adolescence. Instead of sending them each a copy of "Can't Help Thinking About Me" to show that he'd been there too, he acted the kindly uncle, or big brother perhaps, who understood their agonizing lack of self-confidence. As he rose to the challenge of matching their hysteria, his voice changed from the urgent intimacy of the opening lines through the metallic screech he'd used on his 1970 album into a throat-scarring roar way beyond his vocal range. A song that had begun with an unadorned acoustic guitar was now a tumultuous wash of sound, with strings and brass trying to contain the frenzy until Ronson's guitar seized the moment of release and caringly guided the track down to a calming D-flat chord. It was echoed an octave lower by the string quartet, the final sound to be heard on this quintessential rock album. As early as the second line of the song, Bowie substituted a major chord where the key strictly required a minor, as a warning of imminent danger. When the cigarette reached the mouth of the E major, introducing the haunting moment of doubt, quickly diffused by the more predictable changes that made up the verse. By the end of the third verse, when things were so confused that an American car, Chev Brakes, was joined by a British utility vehicle, the Milk Float, the prevailing key was starting to crack under the strain, and the song veered into G-flat for 6 bars, and finally into D-flat for 12 bars, of desperate reassurance. In the final 2 bars, the arrangement incorporated all 3 of the song's key chords in the order in which they had originally appeared. As elegant a landing from a space fantasy as it would be possible to conceive. Now, July 3rd, 1973, Rock and Roll Suicide was the song before which David Bowie, as Ziggy Stardust, announced to the stunned audience and 2 members of his band at least, this is the last show we'll ever do. This was, I guess, this concert was filmed for a supposed rock concert release called Bowieing Out. I assume that that's most of what Ziggy Stardust footage I've seen online in the past has been, or in documentaries in the past has been from. Of course, David Bowie went on to continue music for many, 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 many years, just not as Ziggy and the Spiders from Mars. It turns out he was pretty wrecked from all of his cocaine use and needed to stop what he was doing. He didn't like the repetition. He didn't like his ears ringing all the time. He wanted to do some more film work, things like that, do some other creative stuff that's not rock and roll at that time. And he came out and said as much in interviews, and he had hinted at wanting to quit before this tour, got going and during the tour at times to journalists. And Mick Ronson, guitarist, was aware that that was a sentiment that they were, probably building towards the end here at the Hammersmith Odeon. Another factor was the upcoming American tour that would not happen had been projected to cost a whole lot of money because of all the staging and effects and things and to do and falderall to create a visual spectacle that his manager was famous for doing. Well, RCA had footed the bill for a financially disastrous previous tour, and they were not about to give them a budget to go do anything like it again. So, to keep everyone's reputation intact, kill it. Now, last time around, I was digging into the book Listen Up by Mark Howard, Grammy Award-winning producer. And it's got profiles of his experiences with Bob Dylan, a lot of Dylan, actually. If you're a big Dylan fan and you want to know what recording with him was like in the somewhat more modern era, I would say. Also Neil Young, U2, REM, Tragically Hip, Chili Peppers, and Tom Waits, which we were in the middle of last time. And it's didn't quite get to the recording part yet. So once they did get recording, the author and producer got very excited about the possibilities of what he could do with Tom Waits in this environment that they'd created together. And he suggested all kinds of different sounds. And after 2 days of this, just 2 days, Tom calls him at his hotel. And he, picks up the phone. Tom says he was feeling like a patient. And I was the doctor. I was trying to prescribe him Zyprexa, but he wanted clonazepam. Maybe you're right that I need Zyprexa, but let me do the clonazepam for now. I told him I understood and I would cool it. Basically keep my mouth shut and let him find his way. Well, dear listener, I don't know anything about either of those drugs, but if you do, and you're a Tom Waits fan, maybe that gives you a little bit of insight into his machinations. Tom never spoke in a normal fashion about anything. He had bizarre descriptions for everything. For instance, he couldn't just tell me to turn the vocal up. Instead, he would say, put a little more hair on it. If he recorded something and it got, done on the first take, Tom would say, that one came out of the ground like a potato. Done. If a song wasn't working, he would say, it's like a little fat kid with a bad haircut. I recorded a lot of things using a Sony Blaster with 2 speakers in the front. I kept it in the boys' bathroom because it was the most live-sounding room. On the day we recorded the song Shake It, because, boys' bathroom, they're in a school that's empty right now, recording. I set Brain, aforementioned Primus drummer, in the bathroom. He was taping his snare drum up with gaffer tape, which is what, drummers will do. They'll put some gaffer tape is kind of like the backing is as thick like as duct tape almost, but it's more fabric-y. and the adhesive is not as sticky as duct, doesn't leave a lot of residue like duct tape. So it's used a lot in, live situations where you need something to be taped down and then easily removed, like, microphone cables and things running all over the stage that need to be, hidden or not tripped over. But a lot of drummers will use this kind of thing on the top of their snare drum heads to dampen it a little bit and make it not, sustain as much, depending on what kind of tones they like. If you're a drummer and you're listening right now, I thank you for sitting through that layman's caveman guitar player description of things that you probably do all the time. And maybe I'm not getting it right. So Brain's in the bathroom. He was taping up his snare drum with gaffer tape while I was in the classroom getting the sound up when Tom asked, "What was that?" I listened and I realized he was hearing Brain ripping the gaffer tape. So like, you pull a chunk of tape off of a roll and you rip off the piece, because gaffer tape rips really easily, and with a fabric ripping kind of sound as opposed to a plastic tapey ripping sound. You could notice that if you've got really nice microphones in the room that you've turned up really loud. "That's the sound I want," Tom said. "What, the ripping of the tape?" He nodded. "Yes, it's perfect." So I went in the bathroom to see Brain. I told him that he was going to play the gaffer tape. "How will I do that?" he asked, incredulous. "Just by ripping it." Brian used a whole roll of gaffer tape on the song. Once Brain put down the gaffer tape, he went into the stall to take a piss, but the mic was still on. When he finished, we heard the stall door slam. "What was that?" Tom asked. This time I told him it was the stall door slamming. Metal bathroom doors in a metal bathroom doors in a tiled room with everything's reflective in that room, right? Those school bathrooms with there's probably like exposed pipes and maybe even a radiator. Who knows? It depends on how old it is. But there's not a lot of dampening going on. There's not a lot of softening of the echoes and the reflections in that room. I would guess. I would say it stands to reason. "I want him to play the door," Tom strangely suggested. I went back to the bathroom and told Brain that now he had to play the stalled door. I told him to also hit the wall with a 2x4 piece of wood. So slam the door, then hit the wall with the wood as the rhythm. At the end of the song, the stall door broke off and fell on the floor from being slammed. It was perfect timing. Tom would show up every day with a cup of coffee, instructing us not to tell Kathleen. She said, she had Tom on a special diet and he was not allowed coffee. She also had him going to Pilates. He asked me if I had ever done yoga, and I told him I hadn't. "I think you should try it and go to a class while you're here." I did, and I've been practicing yoga on and off ever since. I tracked 3 different versions of the song Circus, one on piano, another using a Portishead loop, and the one that made the record, done on a Chamberlin keyboard. Tom said he bought the Chamberlin from 2 surfers in L.A. He saw it in their garage and bought it right on the spot. The Chamberlin is a keyboard that uses taped samples of real instruments. Tom's had a double keyboard with orchestral sounds on one side and percussion sounds on the other. I played bell sounds, then slowed them down to make them sound like church bells in the distance. I recorded bacon frying and made it sound like crackles on a record. The song eventually began to sound like something from Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone. Shout out to you, Mark Howard, for name-checking Rod Serling and not just calling it The Twilight Zone. On weekends, Tom would call me up and say that he wanted to record interesting things like bees buzzing in a bottle, or ask if we could record crickets and then slow them down so that they would sound like an orchestra. Tom also coached his son's baseball team. And on one occasion, he invited me to watch. I showed up at the game to find Tom hammering his fist on the fence, yelling, "Go, Sullivan!" Tom said, "Come next week. I'm running the snack shack." I went back the next week, and sure enough, there was Tom working in the snack shack. I went up and said, "Hey, Tom, give me a hot dog." He looked flustered. "Hot dog, eh? I don't know how to do that." He smiled. "Kathleen," he yelled. "One hot dog." One day, Tom shared with me that he and Kathleen had thought they should buy a house. when their first child was born, so Tom went to the bank only to find out that he had no money. Tom had signed a bad deal with Island Records and discovered they owned all of his publishing rights. Tom Waits, a prolific writer whom some call a genius, didn't even own his own songs. Kathleen really helped Tom turn his life around. At one point, she had had enough of Tom's drinking, and in the middle of the night, threw their kids in the car and left. They didn't even have their shoes because she left so fast. She took the family back to their house in L.A. Tom was in shambles and also went to L.A. He called Kathleen when he arrived. She asked him where he was staying, and he told her down at the Sands. The Sands Hotel? She'd asked. No, he admitted. On the sands down at the beach. Tom went to a bookstore looking for a book on how to help his marriage and found a book called How to Leave Your Wife. He picked it up and took it to the counter. The woman looked at him and said, "This is the book you want? How to Weave Your Life?" He had read the title very differently, thinking it was a book about divorce. He told me he bought the book anyway, and that it had a lot of good things in it. Since Tom was having marriage problems, he went to see the marriage therapist. Sorry, a marriage therapist. There are many. It's a booming business, I think. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, maybe it's not for everybody. I don't know. Maybe marriage is for the whole, like the multiple industries about wedding planning and event catering and flower arranging, jewelry sales. I don't know. And then marriage counseling. Maybe it's not for every single person ever born. Maybe as a society we could slowly move towards the idea that it is a very special thing that needs to be nurtured as it goes along, and that the wedding day isn't the end of the process. Maybe, I don't know, there could be more support in the friend community and the family for the marriage and the relationship. I don't know. How would I know? I've just grown to the age of 45 watching them fail and fall apart and lead to acrimony and abuse and resentment over years and years and years of people I've known and observed and family experiences. Not the abuse, in my case. So the therapist suggests that Tom and Kathleen try a thing called mystery dating. Once a week, they were to take each other out on a date, but not tell the other person where they were going. Kathleen said it didn't work because Tom took her to the hardware store for the mystery date that he'd planned. Tom thought it was great because the store had tons of cool stuff, like 1,000 different types of nails. Tom had a great fear of performing. One time when he was doing a sold-out show in New York, he determined he could not go on without a drum that was at Kathleen's mom's house in Brooklyn. It was a marching drum with a painting on the front of the Alps and a lake. Kathleen told him he didn't need it to do the show, but Tom insisted. Kathleen did not know what to do, so she drove all the way to her mother's house, got the drum, and brought it back. The audience waited for over an hour and a half for Tom to go on. Kathleen returned with the drum, and Tom went on. Although he didn't even play the drum, it was just sitting there on stage like a security blanket. And of course, that's the case with these sorts of stories, right? It's not about the thing. It's not about using the thing. It's about what the thing represents that makes the process okay, or makes the next action doable. I'm a doctor. I'm a psychologist. Also a terrible liar. Moving on. When a song needed something, Tom would go around the room trying different instruments. Sometimes nothing satisfied him, and he'd return to a huge pea pod shaker. It was his secret weapon and always worked on any song he decided to use it on. Working in an installation studio with everything in one room was ideal for Waits, because working in a normal studio meant he'd have to run out on the studio floor, try the instrument, record it, then run back into the control room and listen. Then keep doing that until something stuck. He said that was exhausting. This time he was as happy as a kid in a candy shop, experimenting with everything within reach. Initially, I thought the mouth rhythms Tom had done on his 4-track cassette would sound better once we started to record and redo them. but I just couldn't beat the sound he'd achieved, even with all the expensive gear I had. Overloading the preamp in the Tascam gave it a thump like a kick drum, and the lo-fi quality was all part of the sound. I ended up using the original recordings and bounced them to the IZ Radar to loop them so we could layer on top. All of the album was recorded on 2-inch tape, but once we had the main takes, I bounced them to the IZ Radar to mix. Now, for some of you, if this is getting all too technical, don't worry. We're kind of coming to the end of this segment, and it's not going to be just, all a whole bunch of, electronic jargon or anything. There's a little bit of talk about microphones, though, that I think is relevant. He was convinced, Mr. Tom Waits, that his recorded voice didn't sound good, but the producer tries several different microphones, and the Sony C37A mic was one that he liked a lot for production, but Tom didn't really get into it as much as a vintage RCA 44 that Tom liked the sound of. He says, I got the best vocal sound I'd ever had on the song Green Grass, recorded with the RCA 44. It was big and warm with a huge print. Tom always thought his voice was too low, which made it unclear. He would cup his hands around his mouth like a megaphone, thinking that if he took all the low off his voice, it would be clearer. I remember playing the track back, and I was so proud of what we'd done, but he said it was too clean. It sounded like Murray McLaughlin. Murray was a Canadian singer-songwriter known for making squeaky clean records. To me, that was a low blow. I had pushed the envelope my entire life, trying to stay as far away as possible from anything remotely clean. Tom made me roll off some of the low, but I managed to keep the velvet sound of his voice. Tom really pushed me sonically. He made a comment one day that he thought the drums sounded a little beige. I hate beige, I said. I cranked the drums up, made them over-the-top exciting. Still beige? I asked. Toward the end of the recording, I took some control, telling Tom that he needed to step back and look at the big picture of the record. Often artists are too close to the project and they can't see the obvious. I mixed everything right there at the schoolhouse, and once finished, I packed up, headed back to L.A. I mastered the record with Gavin Lurson at the Mastering Lab on Sunset. The record Real Gone was rated 4 out of 5 stars by Rolling Stone and went to number 1 on Billboard Independent Albums chart. Good for you. Tom was nominated for Best Rock Vocal Solo Performance at the Grammys for the song Metropolitan Glide. After pulling out of the Paramore to make Tom's record, I never returned. Instead, I set out on my around-the-world studio installation record productions. I really thought that the Paramore was going to be a huge success. But after 4 years there, and with the music industry slowly crashing, it only really worked for my own productions. Tom Waits' album initiated the change. I was ready to move on. Talk, a little bit of Jack White talk, her meeting him for the first time and what it was like to go on stage with him eventually after they'd made a record together. But she talks about making the record and having met him at his place and, taking a look around the studio and he surprised her with having tracks all ready to go before she arrived. She says, the more we talked, the more comfortable I got. Jack is a genuine person, and I could see that this guy was really a fan. He could name a lot of my songs, including some of the lesser-known things, and was obviously very familiar with my career. I respected him because he knew my kind of music even better than I did. He had studied it. It was clear that Jack was for me in every way, and I felt honored by the respect he showed me. After a little while, we talked, and Jack said, "Are you ready to hear some of your playbacks?" I was a little taken aback. You've already got playbacks? It never occurred to me that he might have already recorded the tracks before my arrival. I said, Jack, you didn't ever ask me what key I sing these songs in. He kind of chuckled uneasily and said, no, I'm sorry. I kind of guessed at it. Once he started playing the songs, I liked what I heard, but there were a couple of them I couldn't sing. The key was too high and they were too fast. Rip It Up? My gosh, it was so fast. I said, Jack, we can't use that one. I won't be able to do it. Oh, it'll be fine, he said. I think you can handle it. The only way I can sing it is if we lower the pitch and you have to slow down anyway to get all those words in. Once we did that, it was still on the higher end. When you hear it on the album, I sounded like about 16 years old. On the next song, I sound like an old lady. I was happy with the songs we picked out for the album. When Jack said he wanted me to do Rum and Coca-Cola, I couldn't believe it. I always loved the version by the Andrews Sisters since I was a kid. And I'd always wanted to record it. I don't know why I never had. But it was as if Jack knew exactly what was right for me. That blew my mind. One of the songs he had pushed me to do was You Know I'm No Good by Amy Winehouse. Amy was still living at the time, but I wasn't familiar with her. From the start, I told Jack I didn't really know the song, and truth be told, I didn't even actually try to learn it. I didn't want to record it. I thought maybe we could skip over that one. But when I found out Jack had already brought in the band to create the track, I figured there wasn't any getting out of it. Finally, I told myself, Wanda, if you're going to work with this young guy, do what he suggests. He has his finger on the pulse, and he's got your best interest at heart. Of course, that didn't make me any more prepared. I was in the recording booth with headphones on. Jack would sing me the notes from the control room. He'd have me sing along with him 2 or 3 times, and then we'd go to the next line. He taught me the song right there on the spot. Jack was incredibly patient, which is unusual for a young man. What's funny is that I didn't want to record You Know I'm No Good, but it has since become one of my favorites. That's one of the songs I regularly do on stage. I love to sing it. I was so sad when Amy Winehouse died in 2011. She was only 27 years old and was so talented. I can only imagine how many great songs we missed out on when she left us too soon. Now, earlier in the book, she talks about touring with Elvis, and I think we mentioned her meeting Elvis on the last episode. And, her dad was in charge of her career. She was very young at the time. And Dad didn't really think Elvis was all that great. They are backstage at a show, I guess the first show of this tour with Elvis and Wanda. And they're in the dressing room and they hear people just going crazy and losing their minds and all this noise coming from the stage area. So he has Wanda sit tight and rushes off to see what the commotion is because he's worried there might be a fire in the theater or something. And he comes back to sort of laughing to himself going, you're not going to believe this. You have to go check it out for yourself. It's not a fire. And she witnesses what Elvis is doing to all the women in the crowd and them like hurling themselves at the stage and trying to get their hands on him and him being so confident and having all this, swagger and sexual energy. Those are not her words, but it's clear that's what she's getting at and trying to say it in the nicest nice young girl / nice old lady way possible. She mentions, the fact that they didn't have a heartthrob like that of any kind before Elvis. The only thing comparable was Frank Sinatra, but, the ladies just fainted when he sang to them. They didn't try to scramble up on the stage and rip off his clothes. So she's like, this is going to be nice performing with this fella. And on the drive to the next show, her dad just out of nowhere, while she's drifting off and falling asleep to the car radio, just goes, that boy's got to get his show in order. What boy's that, Daddy? Of course, I knew exactly who he was talking about. That Elvis. He's all over the stage messing around, and he's got to stop slurring his words, too. Nobody can understand him. I smiled. Well, I can understand him. Daddy just shook his head. I don't think they had a term for it yet in those days, but it was on that car ride that I first understood the concept of a generation gap. She goes on to talk about playing the Silver Moon Club in Newport, Arkansas, and, even though they had a nice elevated stage to kind of keep the performers away from the audience, you know, the place was sold out, and the girls did scream and squeal and swoon, and the whole energy of it was kind of frightening for her to experience. But she says seeing the kind of power a performer could have over a crowd was intriguing to her. So she's clearly starting to get a little bit more of a, I think I'm picking up on how to do this. I think I can see what the potential of this is if I do things my way, the right way. You know, maybe if I find my own way of conjuring up whatever it is Elvis is doing with his act. And there's a little break in the run where she goes home, buys all Elvis's records, listens to him, then gets back on the road playing a whole bunch of shows with him that had been packaged by a guy named Bob Neal. She says, Elvis fever was spreading rapidly. In fact, he had spent the previous week on a tour through Florida, headlined by comedian Andy Griffith. There were several other country performers on the shows, including Marty Robbins, Ferlin Husky, Jim Reeves, Jerry Rogers Snow, and my old boyfriend, Tommy Collins. There's a line in that song Merle Haggard wrote about Tommy that says he once followed Elvis Presley. That's the truth, but you can bet nobody wanted to follow Elvis by the end of that week. 3 days before I saw him again, Elvis was mobbed for the first time at a baseball stadium in Jacksonville. The audience busted through police barriers and chased him to the locker room, managing to get away with his shirt, coat, shoes, ring, and watch. All he was left with were his pink pants, and even those were pretty well ripped to pieces. The Andy Griffith tour wrapped up in Tampa the night before Elvis and I played together once again. That Tampa show is where they took the famous picture of him and his guitar on stage that you see in the cover of his first album for RCA. It's the one that says Elvis in pink lettering down the left side and Presley in green letters across the bottom. If you can picture that image, then you know exactly what Elvis looked like the day after it was taken when we reunited once again. And if you can't picture it, I'll just tell you, he looked good. The first show of our package tour was in Tupelo, Mississippi. Oh boy, Elvis's hometown, before the Presleys moved to Memphis. It was the first time he'd played there since his recording career began. So he's done the Sun Records stuff, right? And he's probably recorded for RCA, and they took the photo for the album cover that they were gonna, release. So that means Heartbreak Hotel has not come out yet. Okay. I'm just getting it together in my head. Elvis received second billing above Red Sovine and then me. Oh, the headliner was Webb Pierce. There we go. And then Elvis was dressed in black pants and a lightweight pink coat. He was probably only on stage for about 20 minutes, but we were playing the fairgrounds and the crowd was enormous. By the time Webb Pierce took the stage to close the show, most of them were gone, and the ones that were left were just too excited to concentrate on anything else but what they'd just seen. Webb had been drinking, and he was a little off his game that night, but it hardly mattered. He'd already lost that crowd before he started. When Webb finished his set, he made it clear that he would never follow Elvis again. As far as I know, he never did. The remaining 4 shows we played on that tour all concluded with the rising king of rock and roll closing the proceedings. The next day, we traveled down to Sheffield, Alabama to play a couple of shows, and a new artist named Johnny Cash joined us for those appearances. She doesn't have anything else to say about Johnny, at least not in this part, but she does talk about how by the time this run kind of finished up, Elvis is definitely going on last, doing multiple encores, but Wanda is actually playing right before him and also getting some encores. Everyone else is going on before them. One of those shows on the tour was when Elvis asked her out to get a Coke. Of course, she had to ask her dad. I didn't like all his rules, but I know he was looking out for my best interest. I don't know if she would have said the same thing if she was writing her autobiography when she was, 22. But hey, Daddy didn't mind if Elvis or any of the other guys ever rode with us, but of course, I could never ride with Elvis from town to town. Elvis, Scotty, and Bill, that's his band if you don't know, usually rode in Elvis's Cadillac. They were just starting to get air conditioning in cars at the time. Up until then, we just had to roll the windows down and let it blow. I used to have an Uncle Henry who kept the windows up in the sweltering summer heat because he wanted to impress folks by making them think he had air conditioning. Elvis really did have it, but he wouldn't use it at first because he said it closed up his throat. I don't know if it was because his bandmates threatened to kill him, but I think he got used to it pretty fast. Now, there's plenty more in this chapter about getting to know Elvis. And she does admit later that Elvis was the one that told her Johnny Cash was going to be the biggest star in country music someday, and she didn't really believe him. They'd be on the side of the stage and, watching the Johnny Cash set. And she's like, I'm not even in it. I don't even like him that much. And Elvis is like, no, you got to watch. You got to watch what he does. And it was just, absorbing everything that Johnny Cash did from his vantage point there. Elvis Presley, just admiring what that guy was doing. She says, yeah, on the tour, whenever she saw Johnny Cash, he wasn't performing or with his band. He was like just leaned up against a brick wall somewhere smoking a cigarette by himself. So she didn't really feel all that inspired to just go up and start talking to the guy. She mentions the first time she gets invited over to Elvis's parents' house with him, and her dad had been sufficiently charmed by his manners at that point to allow it to happen. And she arrives at the door of the house. Elvis introduces her to his mom before taking her down the hall to the bedroom. She says he had a record player and a lot of records stacked up next to it. He'd been telling me all week I should start singing this new kind of music he was doing, but I didn't think I could pull it off. He began playing different records to help me get a grip on the feeling of what he was doing. He told me I needed to let loose and have more fun. That's the same thing Hank Thompson had told me way back at the Trianon Ballroom. I didn't realize I was being uptight on stage, but maybe I was. Elvis would play an R&B record and then pick up his guitar and say, look, instead of playing country style by plucking each individual string, you need to strum all of them at once like this. I had actually started out playing that way, but Daddy said not to do it like that. He taught me to pick the strings and didn't like me strumming them all at once. Interesting. Was it just too forceful? Not ladylike? I suppose. Not delicate enough. After the episode with the felt pick during my recording session in Nashville, she talks about her first recording experiences where she's playing too hard and they give her a felt pick. And it's still too aggressive, I guess. They had to really tone her down. She'd done her best since then not to play so heavy. Elvis wanted me to unlearn. That was my real introduction to how to play rock and roll. Elvis's career was really booming, yet he was still concerned about me and my little career. He knew I loved it so much. And I think he sensed that I would be around for a while in the business. It meant a lot that he took an interest and encouraged something he saw in me I couldn't yet see for myself. I've been asked several times over the years what the records were that Elvis played for me that day. Give me a break! I was a 17-year-old girl in Elvis Presley's bedroom. Do you honestly think I was paying a lick of attention to remembering what exact records I was hearing? I was just trying not to jump out of my own skin or pass out on the floor like all those girls at his shows. You know how Elvis on stage would drive a young woman to hysterics? Try getting a private concert from him in his bedroom. While the physical attraction between the two of you was palpable, I felt like I died and gone to heaven. At one point, we were interrupted when Elvis's mother tapped on the door and poked her head in. Honey, I'm going to the store now, she said. What would you like for supper? Elvis thought about it for a second and said, I think I'd like some weenies and sauerkraut. She nodded. Okay, that'll be fine. I'll be back shortly. I kind of smiled to myself thinking about how much his family was like our family. The parents' lives were wrapped around their child as they did all they could to support those musical dreams. Then she talks about the restlessness that he starts to exhibit, his body language, running his fingers through his hair and his kinetic energy. He couldn't stop fidgeting no matter where he was or what he was doing. And that made her feel a little nervous sometimes. He got up from the edge of the bed and removed the needle from the record that was still playing. The room was suddenly silent. It was the first time we had ever been together with no distractions, and the thought of being alone with him made my heart pound so loudly in my chest. I wondered if Elvis could hear it. He reached over and shut the door, before slinking over to the chair where I was sitting by the record player. He took my hand, interlocking his fingers with mine as he leaned in close. You know what happened next? Well, I'm a lady, and a lady never kisses and tells. go back to Altamont. And that is the story as related by Joel Selvin. It kind of makes me wonder about his other book, Summer of Love. I bet it's pretty good, based on how much I love Altamont. Now, where we left off, Bill Graham is becoming more and more of a local going concern, business-wise, in San Francisco, even as he has already expanded to other cities and as far as the East Coast. It says tension was rising and money was at the center of it. The next week, Bill Graham blew his fuse again, announcing loudly and clearly in different newspaper interviews that he was closing the Fillmore in January 1970 and retiring. There was a deal pending for the sale of the building that housed the dance hall to the restaurant and hotel chain Howard Johnson's. And a bitter and angry Graham was fed up with all the strife. I'm supposed to get up in the morning and say, "I'm sorry, world, for being a success," he said. "I'm sorry for making a good living? For bringing good music to this town? Apologize for what? Feel guilty about what?" After the deal with Howard Johnson's collapsed, it was a promise he would not make good on for another year and a half. But it was a clear indication of how explosive the emotional landscape had become. And I'm just thinking, closing the Fillmore in January 1970, wouldn't that would have meant the Band of Gypsies record would have had to been recorded somewhere else very suddenly. Or maybe not that suddenly. Maybe they already knew that this was a possibility, and Band of Gypsies had been looking at other venues. I don't know. Because it was Fillmore West, right? I'm not going to look it up. Someone look it up and give me a call. Let's see. It was a clear indication of how explosive the emotional landscape had become. In the height, the flower children were gone, and what was left were the street people. Eesh. That doesn't sound like a positive development. Unnerving as this was, few outside the scene had any idea of the rifts that had formed. The cancellation of the Wild West and the bitter divide it revealed did little to dampen San Francisco's rule over rock music in 1969. Another reason for that was the hometown media. From the bully pulpit of his 5 times a week column in the San Francisco Chronicle, journalist Ralph J. Gleason ran what he considered the bulletin board of the city's music scene. A contentious Irish jazz buff in a deerstalker hat, owl-eyed glasses, and tweed jackets. Deerstalker hat is a phrase I only know because of, ladies and gentlemen, that's right, Basil Rathbone, as he portrayed Sherlock Holmes with the deerstalker hat, which was not a creation of the author Conan the Barbarian Doyle, as far as I know. He leveraged tremendous influence with his indictments and prognostications. He was the first regular jazz critic at any American daily newspaper when he started contributing to the Chronicle in 1950. He always covered the vast array of popular music diet, from Hank Williams to Fats Domino, outside his home base of the jazz world. As the new rock music exploded under his feet in San Francisco, Gleason was there every step of the way, cheering the growing scene along and helping expand the audience. His enthusiasm for the music led Wags to joke that he was a 48-year-old man trying to decide if he was 2 24-year-olds, 3 16-year-olds, or 4 12-year-olds. Gleason loaned his considerable prestige and some valuable money to a UC Berkeley College newspaper rock critic named, are you ready for it? Jan Venner, to start his underground rock magazine, Rolling Stone, in November 1967. He contributed a weekly think piece, and as the San Francisco-based magazine grew to become the international journal of the mushrooming rock culture, Gleason's power and influence expanded beyond all others in the press. He was known for sharp opinions, flinty integrity, and occasional sappy sentimentality. The presence of that kind of media exposure gave the San Francisco music scene a kind of worldwide prominence shared only by London and New York. Gleason followed closely all news of the pending U.S. tour by the Rolling Stones. One of his columns would cause the Stones to blink. Now, funny, there was an episode of A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll at least a year or so ago, where I was commenting on a 2 DVD disc, many hour Rolling Stone historical retrospective produced by Rolling Stone. And this gentleman's investment, seed money, and nurturing of the original magazine, if it was mentioned, would have been only in passing, because I would have eaten that story up. I will probably try to do my best to find whatever book has that story in it, or maybe some articles online in the World Wide Web. We'll see. But no, they had to move along as fast as they could to Britney Spears and Bill Clinton and other exciting, other things they had more control over themselves, I guess, was the way they saw it. How the public perceived these figures, that they could shape the public's view of not, the burgeoning San Francisco scene, and how Rolling Stone helped. I would love to hear the story of how Rolling Stone helped the culture of the hate move from, a lot of hippies and street people and revolutionaries and maybe some drug addicts and crazy folks to this sort of behemoth, because of a much older gentleman that was cranking out articles 5 days a week for a local newspaper that needed to know he could actually build something bigger than that with his trust in the younger generation. That's pretty inspiring. Now, with the Haight-Ashbury community, I know I flip-flop from like Haight to hate. I don't know. It's one of those things like Appalachian and Appalachia and Nolans and New Orleans and New Orleans and New Orleans. Whatever. No one's paying me to get it right. With the Haight-Ashbury community struggling as the utopian experiment disintegrated, the Grateful Dead had actually abandoned the city more than a year before, recentering the band's operations 45 minutes north of town. It was there the drummer Mickey Hart had rented a ranch outside Novato on the edge of Marin County. Hart built a recording studio in the old barn and kept horses. He liked to come back from shows at the Fillmore West and go for long horseback rides into the dawn, giving LSD to himself and his horse, the dose adjusted for body weight. Prior to leaving San Francisco, the Dead had been living in the center of the Haight at 710 Ashbury, a rambling Victorian rooming house where Garcia and Mountain Girl shared the attic, and the other band members, crew, and girlfriends were scattered throughout the other 3 floors. In another nearby house, the house was a community center, and the members of the Dead a continual presence around the neighborhood. Mountain Girl, whose real name was Carolyn Adams, commonly could be found sitting on the stoop with friends in the late afternoon, smoking joints as fingers of fog slithered in from the ocean. Nothing was more emblematic of the Haight's decline than the Dead's ceremonial decamping from the neighborhood for the North Bay in March 1968. The ranch quickly became a focal point of the Northern California music scene, not just for the Dead, but for other artists as well. Stephen Stills moved into Hart's Ranch during the summer of 1969. Stills fancied himself a horseman, and he and Hart would go for long rides together, as Stills regaled Hart with arcane accounts of Civil War battles. Stills' musical partner, David Crosby, had taken a house nearby in Larkspur, not far from where Jerry Garcia was living with Mountain Girl. Dead drummer Billy Kreutzmann had a teepee on Hart's property, where Crosby and Stills sat down with members of the Dead and taught them harmony vocals. Crosby and Stills showed them how to blend their singing, even though the men in the Dead didn't have that pair's golden voices. Garcia, Bobby Weir, and bassist Phil Lesh found their own idiosyncratic approach to singing together. Crosby and Stills also demonstrated how to stack overdubbed vocals in the recording studio. God, that's cool. That is so cool. I love that those guys would, just like camp out, have all this time to ride horses and tell stories and teach each other, musical techniques. That's very nice. I don't listen to either of these bands, although I have a neighbor who gave me a recent magazine collection of Crosby, Stills, Nash Young stories that I will be drawing from to learn from. I will say this, my own dad My own dear dad was born in 1950 and lived most of his youth in California or Washington State. Never a hippie. Didn't go to Vietnam because he was deaf in one ear. Also, like me, very short, so that might have kept him out for a time. I don't know, even if he didn't have the deafness. But he did some surfing. He was a Beach Boys fan. As I've mentioned, I think on a previous episode, where he went to high school in Southern California near Hollywood Park, the horse race track. I'm sure everyone knows the horse race track, Hollywood Park, right? That's where his dad worked, and that's where my dad worked eventually, besides up here in the Northwest. He said, the guys listen to the Beach Boys, girls listen to the Beatles. It was just one of those things. There was a dividing line there. And he was never much of a rocker, my dad, but he loved Beach Boys and he loved some songs from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He never got into buying albums that I know of, at least not when we got into the cassette era, the cassette tape era, driving in your car era of listening to music, which is how I knew my dad and his tastes. I mean, my mom just liked good singers in general, mostly female. But Dad liked the sound of a good stack of harmony vocals. To him, he actually said this to me, rock and roll didn't really get that great for him until the mid-'60s, when a lot better singers were coming together and doing these kind of harmony vocal sounds. And he's not a singer himself. So, yeah, he's not a guy to listen to guitar virtuosos. He's not a guy to listen to Elvis either. He didn't hate it when I got into Huey Lewis and the News, though, as a child in the 80s. So yeah, that at least those guys could sing together. So, and I say all that because it's funny for me to read this and go, man, I want to learn about these guys now. I want to listen to I want to listen to some more Dead, listen to some more Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young. As I learn more about them, let's see they're hanging out. Yeah, recording studio stuff. New vocal arrangements were just the start for the Dead. Also living with Garcia was the new Dead lyricist, Garcia's longtime buddy, Robert Hunter. So they're doing, kind of like Cream would do in a way, and what Hawkwind would do with Michael Moorcock coming in to help write with them. I think, there's this cool thing going on of one of your main songwriters has a friend that's got a good way with words. He's a poet, something like that. Because in Cream, it was Jack Bruce who had a good friend whose name, I want to say Pete Brown. I got a whole book on Cream that I dug out recently that we're going to draw from here pretty soon as well. But the gentleman that helped co-write lyrics for some really, really great Cream songs, those didn't all come from within the band. I'm pretty sure it was Pete Brown, but I'm not going to look it up right now. Oh my God, what's happening to me? So yeah, I did go back and look in the Chris Welch Cream book and verify it was Pete Brown that I was thinking of. He was the poetry guy and the spoken word performer that was good friends with Jack Bruce and helped co-write some of the songs, much to the chagrin of Ginger Baker, who still feels like he deserves full songwriting credit for hitting the drums like dun 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 dun. Also, in that same page of the book where I was verifying the information, it mentions the Goon Show being a big influence on the fellas in Cream that wrote lyrics, which is funny because I was just reading in that Beatles book, the 150 Glimpses of the Beatles, about how the Goon Show and Spike Milligan were huge influences on John Lennon, especially when his lyrics got into come together territory. The more goofy, this sounds like it might be meaningful, but really it's not meaningful kind of lyrics that are easily misinterpreted, not just in meaning, but in the pronunciation. And there's a whole little chapter about that in the Glimpses of the Beatles book about, the various misheard phrasings in the lyrics to that song, which, in the era of vinyl only, it's fair. So back to Mr. Hunter and Mr. Garcia. The pair had been turning out songs all spring, Hunter's typewriter clacking through the floor as Garcia put stanzas to music downstairs. Garcia and Hunter were very much under the spell of Music from Big Pink, the debut album by the band, admiring its clapboard authenticity and rough-hewn sound that proudly left the roots showing. Harmony Howling. Harmony Howling. Use take 2. The Dead had largely exhausted the psychedelic arabesques of their third album. Oh, man. Aoxomoxoa. And had recently finished a new double record set cut at San Francisco's Fillmore West and Avalon Ballroom, Live Dead, that depleted their existing catalog of songs. None of the group's albums sold well, and the Dead found themselves deep in debt to their record label. They needed new songs for a new album. The Dead had summoned Hunter to bring his Joycean literary touch to their enterprise. His first lyrics were for the psychedelic epic Dark Star. It was a long way from Cole Porter, but Hunter's work suited the band's sensibilities. The Dead did not play simple pop music. They specialized in dense, often disjointed compositions built on improvisation, and rarely performed the same way twice. The complexity could be daunting to listeners, but the band did not cater to the public. After drummer Mickey Hart joined, the Dead began experimenting with exotic polyrhythms. They were an acquired taste. Still, songwriting had never been the group's strong suit. And as Garcia and Hunter turned their attention to learning songcraft, signaling the start of a shift for the band, what they were working towards wasn't entirely clear. In June, Garcia cut acoustic demos of the new songs that hewed back to the Dead's beginnings as a bluegrass/jug band, and included a country-flavored, updated version of Casey Jones, the first sketch of these fresh and wayward ideas. The ranch provided an accommodating clubhouse for the band, and the rustic surroundings helped inspire the new sounds they were trying to cultivate. Hell's Angels, dope dealers, and Indian medicine men hung around with the musicians and were welcome. The Dead identified with outlaw gangs, commonly brandishing firearms at the ranch, and saw the band as living around the law, outside the law, rebels who stayed true to their own code. All right, well, fuck that take. Let's try take 2. The Dead identified with outlaw gangs, commonly brandishing firearms at the ranch, and saw the band as living outside the law. Rebels who stayed true to their own code. They flouted convention, authority, and wherever else you had. The mixture of characters on the ranch could not have mirrored the band's personality better. By the summer of 1969, the Grateful Dead had become a disorganized, anarchistic group of chemically altered contrarians. Twinkly-eyed guitarist Jerry Garcia, an erstwhile beatnik with a brilliant, nimble mind, had an insatiable appetite for music. While Garcia reigned as the unacknowledged leader, the other band members also added their own characters to the mix. The Dead may have enjoyed a cultish reputation in the underground, but not only did the group's records not sell well, the radio also rarely played their music, and their box office appeal was limited. They were little known outside hip circles beyond San Francisco. The Dead could attract an audience at the Fillmore East in New York City and anywhere in San Francisco, but their drawing power elsewhere was doubtful. They never made any real money. That year, they were struggling to make ends meet. They were an attraction on the summer festival circuit, but they couldn't go far on the $22.50 they were paid to play Woodstock. The musicians and their outsized extended family lived in genteel hippie poverty. Again, this situation where brave artistic souls could come together and make great art under these dire circumstances is very sort of romantic and fanciful to think about. And in America in the 20th century, it does seem like it only really happened for a short time in the post-war era, post-war. I don't know much about the beatnik years, but it really does seem like this is a good example of something that was echoed in the episode I did on outlaw journalists, where, you know, these struggling, you know, dirtbags in the late 60s through late 70s, you know, they could really make their way in the world, whether it was New York or Detroit or, you know, parts of California, because there wasn't a lot of expensive real estate, you know, that you were sort of constrained by when it came to where you could live. You could find places that were semi-abandoned or at least affordable and move in your crew of writers, photographers, you know, people that want to put on plays, people that wanted to form bands, create networks and things like that. It was allowed to happen because the economy had not stamped out all possibility of those sort of communities coming together. Very fascinating, very interesting. It's only now at this age that I learn these things. And it makes you go, oh, that's why some of those things got to happen the way they did. Obviously, there's artistic scenes and music scenes all over the world every year, every day that happen in different circumstances. It didn't need that, to be the case. But all those things fascinate me anyways, How do economic constraints affect art or expression or culture? Just in the same way that technology does. Just in the same way that politics will. Fun. At least for me it is. Now, I want to deviate a bit, but not too far. I want to go back in time a little tiny skosh to some of the aforementioned Beach Boys era and into the CIA and Charles Manson era. Yes, that's the sound. That's the sound of a book being lovingly rubbed. All right, calm down. I'm a bibliophile, not a bibliophiliac. I don't know if that's a word. What if bibliophiliac is just like the desire to have sex with dead librarians? I smell a movie for Blumhouse or A24 if you got the money. Now, my friend Diana knows I like a bit of 60s or just post-war CIA spookery, and she threw me this book called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s by Tom O'Neill with Dan Piepenbring. And I think this is one of those books that probably Joe Rogan loves. I think I think if someone connected with this book might have been on his show or something like that. I read Helter Skelter a couple times when I was in my 20s, once right before I did acid with my girlfriend, and we were listening to Monster Magnet's Super Judge album, and every time I closed my eyes, I would see Charles Manson singing the lyrics to all these Monster Magnet songs. I don't know if I recommend it for the average person. Probably not, but anyway, there's this link with the Manson family and Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys that I was made aware of, not just from reading Helter Skelter, but from Dana Gould's podcast. Obviously, I reference that from time to time. It's a huge influence on me. His pre-recorded historical Hollywood, weirdo bits that he does were a big influence on me wanting to do this whole endeavor, actually. So, because I don't have famous or interesting people in entertainment to interview, which is what he does for the whole rest of most of his podcast time. And this book explores a lot of different angles on the Manson murders and the subsequent trial. And evidently, I haven't read the book. I just kind of wanted to pick out this sort of Beach Boys connection chunk here. Evidently, this book is a attempt to poke some serious holes in Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecuting attorney in the case, in his stories and his account of how things went down. So there's a part here where he mentions a person by the name of, Melcher. Terry Melcher. The author claims that this is the clearest link between Manson and the Hollywood elite. He was a music industry bigwig, and he promised Manson a record deal only to renege on it. The official story was that Manson, reeling from the rejection, wanted to instill fear in Melcher, so he chose Melcher's old house on Cielo Drive as the site for the first night of murders. He knew that Melcher didn't live there anymore. He just wanted to give the guy a good scare. So, obviously, that's, if you know the Manson story, that's not the whole motivation, according to Charlie. There was many other elements to the plan and what he wanted to accomplish with it. If you take Charles Manson at his word, which you probably shouldn't because he's a liar and a criminal. But who knows? I'm excited to read the rest of the book and kind of see if this, I don't know, if there's an idea there that, like, look, what Charlie said after he was arrested is all made up bullshit. This was really just about throwing a scare into this guy from, the record business that rejected him. I don't know. That's kind of a ways to, pretty far for me to go. Anyhow, in this section of the chapter titled "The Golden Penetrators," there's a subheading: "I live with 17 girls," in quotes. It says, "The story of Manson and Melcher starts with Dennis Wilson. By the summer of 1968, Wilson, then 23, had reached an impasse. He'd become world famous as the drummer for the Beach Boys, helmed by his brother Brian. Now the band was in decline, edged out by more subversive acts. Oh, God, ain't that the truth? What a rough time that must have been for those guys. I mean, professionally, what do you do? I mean, you're like America's sweethearts, but then I've said similar things about, like, the Hollywood rock phase in rock and roll music. Your chosen fan base has aged out of the lifestyle. It's not going to last forever. I mean, teenagers in the late 60s, by and large, that were into rock and roll were probably not content with these, like, really happy, pleasant songs about drag racing and, smiling at girls and going surfing and stuff anymore. So let's see. It says there are, his wife Carol had recently divorced him for the second time. She wrote in court filings that he had a violent temper, inflicting severe bodily injury on her during his, quote, rampages. So they have 2 young children. Dennis decides to rusticate. That's a word I've never read before. As a bachelor, he moved into a lavish Spanish-style mansion in the Pacific Palisades, once a hunting lodge owned by the humorist Will Rogers. The home boasted 31 rooms and a swimming pool in the shape of California. He redecorated in the spirit of the times: zebra print carpet, abundant bunk beds, and hosted decadent parties, hoping to have as much sex as possible. Old Dennis is out there. He's out on the market. He's looking for strange. And one day, Wilson was driving his custom red Ferrari down the Pacific Coast Highway when 2 hitchhikers, the families Ella Jo Bailey and Patricia Krenwinkel, caught his eye. He gave them a quick lift. When he saw them again soon afterwards, he picked them up a second time, taking them back to his place for, quotes, milk and cookies. History hasn't recorded what kind of cookies they enjoyed, or whether those cookies were in fact sex, but whatever the case, the girls told Manson about the encounter. They weren't aware of Wilson's clout in the music industry, but Manson was, and he insisted on going back to the house with them. After a late-night recording session, Wilson returned to his estate to find the family's big black bus parked outside. His living room was populated with topless girls. Whatever alarm he felt was eased when their short, intense, unwashed leader, Manson, sunk to his knees and kissed Wilson's feet. This night ushered in a summer of ceaseless partying for Wilson. Manson and the family set up shop in his home, and soon Manson recruited one of the group's deadliest members, Tex Watson, who picked him up hitchhiking. The family spent their days smoking dope and listening to Charlie strum the guitar. The girls made the meals, did the laundry, and slept with the men on command. Manson prescribed sex 7 times a day, before and after all 3 meals, and once in the middle of the night. It was as if we were kings just because we were men, Watson later wrote. Soon Wilson was bragging so much that he landed a headline in Record Mirror, quote, "I live with 17 girls." Talking to Britain's Rave magazine, Wilson offered disjointed remarks about his new friend, whom he called the Wizard. "I was only frightened as a child because I didn't understand the fear," he said. "Sometimes the Wizard frightens me. The Wizard is Charles Manson, who is a friend of mine, who thinks he is God and the devil. He sings, plays, writes poetry, and may be another artist for Brother Records, the Beach Boys label. This last bit excited Manson, who was desperate to leverage his connection with Wilson into a music career. The two co-wrote a song, Cease to Exist, whose lyrics claim that submission is a gift. Later that year, the Beach Boys recorded it as a B-side, changing the title, finessing the lyrics, and dropping Manson's songwriting credit. Ooh, bad idea. Let it go, guys. Let the song, leave it with Charlie. Don't, for crying out loud, you don't take his song and cut him out. Good Lord. A snub that fueled his anger toward the establishment. Manson fraternized with some of the biggest names in music. Neil Young remembered meeting him with the girls at Wilson's place. A lot of pretty well-known musicians around L.A. knew Manson, Young later said, though they probably deny it now. Among these was Terry Melcher. He and Wilson had pledged allegiance to the Golden Penetrators, a horny triumvirate they'd formed with their friend Greg Jacobson. The Penetrators, who had painted a car gold to celebrate themselves, aimed to sleep with as many women as they could. Wilson's ex-wife referred to them as roving cocksmen. Obviously then, Melcher would want to rove over to Wilson's house. It was full of promiscuous young women. Sometimes, in that summer of '68, one of Wilson's marathon parties, he crossed paths with Manson for the first time. After another such party, Melcher rode back to Cielo Drive with Wilson, and Manson came along in the back seat. As Melcher later testified, Manson got a good look at the house from the driveway. When the end of summer came, things went south with Wilson, who'd finally grown tired of footing the bill for the endless party, upwards of $100,000 in food, clothes, car repairs, plus gonorrhea treatments. According to Bugliosi, Wilson was too frightened of Manson to throw him out. Instead, he simply up and left in the middle of the night, leaving the messy business of eviction to his landlord. But it must have been more complicated than that. Wilson gave 3 interviews in which he raved about Manson and the girls, and all of those interviews date to the winter and summer of 1969, nearly a year after he and the family had supposedly parted ways. Why would Wilson brag about his connections to a man he just schemed to escape? The only sure fact is that Manson and his group decamped to the Spahn Ranch in late August 1968. Wilson moved into a Malibu beach house with Greg Jacobson, who had recently also split up from his marriage. Having drifted from Wilson, his best shot at a record deal, Manson knew he had to hitch his wagon to Terry Melcher's star. As his chances at fame dwindled, his mood darkened. He became obsessed with the Beatles' White Album, released in late November 1968, and started to preach about the prophecies of a race war embedded in its lyrics. Things only got worse in the winter of '69, when he arranged for Melcher to come out and hear his music. Manson prepared meticulously for the prospective meeting, but Melcher stood him up. On March 23, a desperate Manson went searching for Melcher, thinking he'd goad the producer into a record deal. He found his way back to the house at Cielo Drive, having remembered that Melcher lived there. Instead, Sharon Tate's personal photographer, Shahrokh Hatami, hopefully I'm somewhat close, intercepted him. Hatami had never heard of a Terry Melcher. He told Manson to go to the guest house and ask the owner of the property, Rudolph Altobelli, who explained currently that Melcher no longer lived there and hadn't left a forwarding address. Manson prevailed on Greg Jacobson, still a friend and still a fan of the girls, to book another session with Melcher. This time it worked. That May, Melcher made the winding drive to the Spahn Ranch and auditioned Manson in person, visiting twice over 4 days. Manson had rounded out a dozen or so of his best songs with backup singing from the girls. Oh, God. Oh, imagine. Performing up in a gully in the woods, the girls sprawled on the ground and gazed up at their leader, who sat astride a rock with his guitar. I wasn't too impressed by the songs, Melcher would later testify. I was impressed by the whole scene, by Charlie's strength and his obvious leadership. As a courtesy, the producer complimented Manson, saying that one or two of his songs were nice. He had no intention of offering a recording contract, but he saw how the family's rustic, cultish lifestyle would lend itself to a TV documentary. Melcher suggested that his friend Mike Deasy, whose van was outfitted to make field recordings, come out to the ranch and capture another performance. Before Melcher could get out of there, a foreman at the ranch came stumbling out of a pickup truck, drunk and belligerent. He was dressed like a cowboy, fingering a holstered gun, the same one that would later be used in the Tate murders. Manson stepped up to him and shouted, "Don't draw on me, motherfucker!" socking him in the gut, taking his gun, and continuing to pummel him. It spooked Melcher. Here was a peace and love cult with naked girls roaming the old Western sets, and yet the constant threat of violence loomed over the place. It needed to be documented in all its oddity. A few days later, Melcher returned with Deasy and Jacobson, and the family repeated their audition. But what had seemed spontaneous now felt rehearsed. Deasy returned a few more times, until he had a frightening LSD trip with Manson and vowed never to go back. It was all getting too toxic. Melcher conveyed his rejection through Jacobson, and that was the end of that. Manson's last brush with greatness was gone, and he became full-on apocalyptic. Melcher never went back to the ranch or saw anyone from the family again, or so he said under oath, anyway. After the murders, as Hollywood panicked and LAPD chased down leads, the Golden Penetrators realized they hadn't quite washed their hands of Manson. That is where their story began to feel unbelievable to me. Manson wasn't charged with murder until late November, but Wilson, Jacobson, and Melcher had good cause to suspect him back in August, right after the killings. By then, they were frightened of Manson, though Helter Skelter does little to indicate their terror. When I saw how much they knew and how quiet they'd kept, when their information would have helped police solve the case, I realized just how flimsy the helter-skelter motive was. Its unforgettable grandiosity may have hidden a more prosaic truth, that a few rich guys had gotten in over their heads with an unstable ex-con. First, Williamson and Jacobson knew that Manson had shot a black man named Bernard Crowe about 5 weeks before the Tate murders, and Jacobson, who testified that he'd talked to Manson upward of 100 times, was well acquainted with his friend's bizarre race war predictions. Manson warned that them whiteys in the affluent homes of Bel Air would be cut up and dismembered, and that the murderers would smear the victims' blood on the walls, scatter their limbs, and hang them from the ceiling. And yet, when a group of affluent whites really was cut up, Sharon Tate was hanging from the ceiling of her home in Bel Air, but Jacobson apparently didn't make the connection. Nor did it occur to him in mid-August when he witnessed Manson's violence firsthand. Manson broke into Jacobson's home in the middle of the night, shook him awake, and produced a bullet. "Tell Dennis there are more where this came from," he said. On the witness stand, Jacobson compared Manson that night to a caged bobcat. The electricity was almost pouring out of him. His hair was on end. His eyes were wild. A few days later, Manson had shown up at Wilson's house, too, demanding $1,500. When Wilson refused to give him the money, Manson threatened him. "Don't be surprised if you never see your kid again." After Manson's arrest, Wilson fell into a deep depression, spurring his problems with drugs and alcohol. Later, he told the Beach Boys' authorized biographer David Leaf, David Leaf wrote a Beach Boys book. Heck yeah, I gotta buy that. I know why Charles Manson did what he did. Someday I'll tell the world. I'll write a book and explain why he did it. He never got the chance. In 1983, 3 weeks after his 39th birthday, an acutely drunk Wilson dove from the deck of his boat into the chilly waters of Marina del Rey and accidentally drowned. Within days, a rock journalist wrote in the San Francisco Chronicle about a jarring exchange he had had with Wilson. "Me and Charlie, we founded the family," Dennis had said, apropos of nothing. The Golden Penetrators then had an abundance of reasons to accuse Manson of the Tate LaBianca murders immediately. They believed he'd shot someone dead. He threatened 2 of them with violence. They knew he stockpiled guns and knives at the ranch, and the slaughter at Melcher's old house was exactly the kind he'd predicted, going down to the most chilling detail. Shouldn't they have connected the dots? Was it possible there was a conspiracy of silence among them? Maha! Interesting stuff. I like it. I'm going to read the rest of this book. Someday, I'm not doing more research on like Richie Valens and oh God, so many other things happening right now, and Guns N' Roses still. Anyways, there we go. There's your Charles Manson Beach Boys. A moment for the day. Thank you. From this nice book, 150 glimpses of the Beatles, which so far I do recommend if you're a Beatles fan. It's a nice sort of, every chapter is a different story. They're all very short. You can jump in and out easily. Pretty fun stuff. Number 40, in January 1964, the Ronettes came to London to headline their first British tour, supported by a local group, the Rolling Stones. On their first night, a party was thrown for them by the Radio Luxembourg disc jockey Tony Hall at his home in Green Street, Mayfair, just down the road from where George and Ringo were living. George and Ringo are members of the Beatles. Okay. John, George, and Ringo, John is also a Beatle, were already there when the Ronettes came in. The Ronettes were aware of the fame of the Beatles. Since their arrival, they had heard of little else, but had still not heard their music. For their part, the 3 Beatles were mustard keen on the Ronettes with their lusty, yearning voices and shapely bodies. As the Ronettes entered, John, George, and Ringo made a beeline for them and showered them with praise. "You've got the greatest voice," George told Ronnie Bennett, the lead singer. "We loved it the first time we heard you." Generally thrifty with his compliments, John was similarly effusive. "Fucking great," he said. "They kept telling us how much they loved our long black hair and how our whole look blew them away," remembered Ronnie. "And we weren't exactly having a bad time ourselves." They all started dancing to records by the Ronettes. "Be My Baby," "Baby I Love You," "I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus." Over the course of the evening, the 3 girls enjoyed teaching the Beatles the latest dance moves from America. The pony, the jerk, the nitty-gritty. Usually a reluctant dancer, John proved eager for tuition from Ronnie. Every time we'd start to dance, John would come over and say, "I don't know if I've got this one yet, Ronnie. I may need some extra instruction." I'm reading this. This is like sight reading. It's just funny as I go along and I get tripped up. It didn't take me long to figure out that he liked me. At the same time, George was making it clear that he was similarly taken with Ronnie's elder sister, Estelle. "We were young and in a foreign country, so we decided to forget our boyfriends back home and have some fun," recalled Ronnie, whose highly strung boyfriend, the record producer Phil Spector, was safely back in America. Yes, if you're dating Phil Spector, the only safe place to keep him is definitely in another country with a whole ocean dividing you. Note that for future anyone who ends up dating someone like Phil Spector. As the night wore on, George and Estelle disappeared from the dance floor, and Ronnie agreed to let John take her on a tour of the house. She was impressed. There were antique vases and fine art in every room. Upstairs, John began trying all the door handles. It dawned on Ronnie that he was after a hidey hole. Just in more ways than one would think. John finally found one door open, so we walked in, but it was so dark, we didn't even notice that George and Estelle were already in there sitting on the bed. "Oops, sorry guys," I said. They eventually found an empty room. Together they sat on a window seat, gazing out over a view of this fairy tale land of lights and towers that seemed to go on forever as the mood became more intimate. "What's all this like for you?" asked Ronnie. "Well, there's a drought, and the window seat is killing my bum." "That's not what I meant. I meant being famous." "Oh, well, I see. Serious stuff. I'll need a smoke for this then." I'm not doing the accent. I'm sorry. I can't do it. They talked about fame. John remembered sitting in cafes with the other Beatles, fantasizing about the future. We'd sit there with our jam butties and tea saying, "When we get our record contract, everything's going to change. We'll have limousines and chauffeurs, and we'll never have to eat another jam butty as long as we live." Then we got our record contract, and you know what's happened? Nothing really changed. Nope. Turns out we were right. Everything did change. We got our limousines and our drivers, and now we've gone right off jam buddies. If I even think of them, I want to heave up. All this talk made Ronnie wonder whether John was one of these heavy brain people just like Phil. She could also tell that John liked her for more than just my voice. When he leaned over and started kissing me, I have to admit, he made me forget about Phil for a few seconds. Professionally, Ronnie had often sung about kissing. "I'll make you happy, baby, just wait and see. For every kiss you give me, I'll give you 3. But so far, she had taken things no further. I know it might seem hard to believe now, but I hadn't done much more than kiss a guy on the lips until then, and that included Phil. Romance was everything, and sex was still a mystery. But the way things were going on that window seat, it didn't look like it was going to stay that way for long. As they kissed, John started moving his hands around in places I didn't even know I had. He then put them around her waist and tried to edge her towards the king-size bed. But at that moment, Ronnie's thoughts turned to Phil, and she suddenly dug her feet into the rug, causing John to topple over onto the floor. "Do you think we could go back down to the party?" she said. Estelle and Ronnie embarked on a series of double dates with George and John. Ronnie was intrigued by how starstruck the two Beatles were. Always wanting to know more about American singers and musicians. "Tell us about the Temptations. What's Ben E. King really like?" One night, George and John collected Estelle and Ronnie from the lobby of the Strand Palace Hotel. Caught off guard, John made the mistake of asking their mother, who was accompanying the girls, if she would like to come too. Her enthusiastic response came as a bitter disappointment. "Dinner? Oh, that sounds fun. Let me get my purse." The evening proved awkward, not least for Ronnie. How can you say anything with your mother sitting around? And the worst part was that she didn't say a word the whole time. She just kept staring at us through the whole meal. Decades later, her mother confessed to Ronnie that she didn't care for the way these big grown men were really liking my little girls. I thought, well, what kind of life am I going to have now? It was, she thought, the most hurtingest night of my life. Towards the end of the month, Phil Spector arrived in town. Ronnie knew his presence would spell the end of their fun. He was bound to refuse to go clubbing, and he would certainly never let her go out without him. Phil never said anything, but Ronnie sensed he didn't like the way that she had been spending so much time with the Beatles. Phil could be tricky that way. There's an asterisk and then a footnote. And the footnote says, "And how?" In 1968, soon after their marriage, he gave her a car for her 25th birthday, but insisted she drive it only when accompanied by him. Or, if he was unavailable, by a life-sized inflatable plastic replica of him, with its knees bent in a permanent sitting position. "Now, nobody will fuck with you when you're driving alone," he explained triumphantly. Year upon year, Phil's jealousy increased. He trapped Ronnie in their house, surrounding it with barbed wire and guard dogs, and confiscating her shoes to prevent her from running away. Furthermore, he threatened to have her murdered if ever she tried to escape. "I'm completely prepared for that day," he told her mother. "I've already got her coffin. It's solid gold, and it's got a glass top so I can keep my eye on her after she's dead." At the same time, on their UK tour, Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones had fallen in love with Ronnie. Keith used to say, "Oh, we would have great babies because you have that black, thick hair, and I have black, thick hair." On the 5th of February, Tony Hall threw another party at his Green Street flat, this time for the Beatles, who were set to embark on their first U.S. tour. "It was a very sweet evening," recalls one person there that night, because the Beatles, as big as they were at the time, had no idea what was about to hit them when they went to America. So they were very apprehensive. Everyone danced along to Martha and the Vandellas' Heat Wave, and Ronnie joined in the singing at the top of her voice. Ronnie was the bird everyone wanted to shag, remembers Tony Calder, a music PR. Everybody was salivating over this incredible little thing. Meanwhile, he saw Phil Spector getting very wound up about the attention everybody was paying to Ronnie. You could feel the sexual tension, every guy in the place looking at her, because she was exotic, and she was American. Phil's jealousy rocketed still further when he heard from Ronnie's mother John had invited the Ronettes to fly to America with the Beatles. Ronnie hadn't had the nerve to tell Phil about their generous offer, so she had asked her mother to broach the topic. You know, Phil, it might be good publicity if the girls went back on the jet with the Beatles. No, I've already bought their tickets. The Ronettes flew back to New York the next day without the Beatles. Phil told Ronnie he would make his own way back. Now, Chapter 41. Ronnie was back home with her mother and sister in Spanish Harlem watching TV coverage of the Beatles arriving at JFK when she happened to recognize a familiar figure on the screen. I almost fainted when I looked at the TV and saw Phil Spector following the Beatles out of their plane. I wanted to strangle him. Having wheedled his way on board the Beatles' plane, Spector had proved a tricky passenger. He's mad as a hatter, observed Ringo. We realized how crazy he was because he walked to America. He was so nervous of flying, he couldn't sit down, so we watched him walk up and down the length of the plane all day. By the time their plane touched down in New York, I Want to Hold Your Hand was #1 on the Billboard charts, and the pre-orders for merchandise were rolling in. Half a ton of Beatles wigs were following them to America, as well as 24,000 rolls of Beatles wallpaper. After a press conference at the airport, the Beatles were driven to the Plaza Hotel. Asterisk, footnote, in her autobiography, I gotta read that, Ronnie states that it was the Warwick Hotel, but on their first visit to the U.S., the Beatles stayed at the Plaza, transferred to the Delmonico on their next visit in August of that same year, after the Plaza, upset by the mayhem, refused to have them back. Nor does it mention the presence of John's wife Cynthia, even though Cynthia had flown out with him. Albert Goldman, one of John's least reliable biographers, states boldly that as soon as Cynthia's back was turned, he hustled Ronnie into an adjoining bedroom. It is possible that Ronnie has got her dates muddled, and John's failed seduction took place at the Delmonico. The Beatles didn't stay at the Warwick until 1966. They were shepherded past thousands of fans who were screaming, "We want the Beatles!" John and George took the trouble to leave the names of the Ronettes with hotel security. Ronnie and Estelle were ushered upstairs together with their cousin Nedra, the third member of the group, and Nedra's boyfriend, Scott. For once, Phil Spector had taken his eye off the ball. While Ronnie was out having fun, he was busy in the studio. The Beatles had an entire floor of the hotel to themselves. Every surface groaned with sandwiches and alcohol. "We're prisoners up here, so they have to feed us well," explained John. In every room, there was a television switched on, but with the sound turned down. Record players were dotted about, with singles scattered all over the floor. "I love America," said John. "People here just bring you anything you want." Estelle and Ronnie sat on the floor with George and John, playing records and chatting. As it grew dark, Ronnie noticed that many of the original visitors had started to leave, and a lot of new guests were arriving, most of them young ladies with very short skirts. You didn't have to be a genius to figure out that a whole new kind of scene was about to start. Mal Evans was going around the remainder of the first batch of guests, telling them it was time to go. "Don't worry, Scott's with us," said Ronnie. "We don't know him, Ronnie," replied John. "He's got to leave." "In that case," said Estelle, she was leaving too. She tried to encourage Ronnie to come with her, but as the group's name suggests, Ronnie was always the most forward of the Ronettes. If weird things were going to happen up here, I didn't want to miss them. The remaining guests started flocking into one of the bedrooms. John grabbed Ronnie's hand. "Come on, don't you want to see what's so interesting?" The bedroom was, to Ronnie's eyes, abnormally crowded. Everyone had gathered around in a circle. A man was standing on a chair taking photographs of whatever was going on in the center. When people spotted John with Ronnie, they made way for them. Ronnie looked on aghast. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. This girl was laying on the bed, and one of the guys in the Beatles' entourage was having sex with her right in front of all these people. And from the look on her face, she didn't seem to mind being used as entertainment at a Beatles party, even though none of them were even taking part. I guess it was enough to just be in the same hotel suite as them, as if that gave her something to tell her grandchildren. I hope not. The man and the woman kept at it, having sex every which way, while the photographer snapped away. For Ronnie, it was an education. She was still a virgin, and furthermore, she always made a point of keeping her underwear on in bed, just to be on the safe side, though she knew the basic details. I didn't know the first thing about doing 69 or any of these other variations. This was 1964, and you couldn't even get films with that stuff on them. And here was an actual girl having naked sex in every different position. That was a scene I'll never forget. She was so nonplussed by the goings-on in front of her that she couldn't help emitting, "Oh my God!" involuntary exclamations. Before long, John leaned over and whispered, "Ronnie, could you do that a little quieter, please?" As the floor show continued, Ronnie helped himself to the only armchair in... As the floor show continued, John helped himself to the only armchair in the room and encouraged Ronnie to sit on his lap. His excitement was all too tangible. That's a phrase. I may have been dumb back then, but I knew when it was time to get up off a guy's lap. She left the room. John followed her, and they went into his bedroom. He pointed to the Manhattan skyline and asked if she remembered the time they looked out of a window in London. Then Ronnie sat down, and John stood behind her, rubbing her neck with his hands. Ronnie said she had to tell him something. "Not now," he said. She said she must. He said he knew all about her and Phil. "I just thought you and I might have something too." Ronnie stood up. She loved talking to him about music, she said, "but sometimes a guy can seem more like a brother than a boyfriend, and that's the way I think of you. I adore you, John, but not the way you want." As she left the room, John slammed the door behind her. But when he phoned her the next day, he behaved as though nothing had happened. Was she free that evening? The Beatles wanted to get away from it all and try some real New York food. And so the three Ronettes enjoyed a quiet night out with the four Beatles at Sherman's Barbecue in Harlem on 151st in Amsterdam. In future, whenever Ronnie dropped by Sherman's, the manager would greet her with a smile. "I remember you. You're the little girl that brought the Beatles." Now, we haven't heard from Gilbert Gottfried yet, and I'm going to run out of these pretty soon, but I want to pick up where we left off with the Norman Greenbaum Spirit in the Sky conversation. His co-host is going to mention some other hit makers from that same week. And one of them, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, should be familiar to you. It is Crow with Evil Woman, which is a song that Black Sabbath was kind of forced to cover on the first record. And I think they released it as a single. They weren't really that into it, but record labels get their way one way or another. Play along, be nice, do the thing, record the song. It'll get you on the charts, supposedly. It's a good tune, though. It doesn't sound out of character for Black Sabbath's first album, quite frankly. When you compare it to the others, it's like, yeah, this sounds like how, like, Since You've Been Gone by Rainbow doesn't sound like the stuff that you love listening to Rainbow for. I'm assuming the listening person is a Rainbow fan. But whatever. You know, there's examples of this stuff. You have bands or artists you like, then they crank out a hit song or a cover, and it seems a little out of character, but it kind of works. That's this.
These were the ones that charted up to Spirit in the Sky. Evil Woman, Don't Play Games With Me by Crow. I don't think I know that one. Baby, Take Me in Your Arms by Jefferson. Hey There, Lonely Girl. You know that one, Eddie Holman.
Hey there,
that's right.
Lonely girl, lonely girl.
That's the one. Ma Belle Amie by the T-Set.
My Bella Meetin. Boom, boom.
This guy did not miss a trick.
Let's get a couple more in really quick. Just a couple of extra mentions. See if you know these ones.
Reflections of My Life by Marmalade.
Oh, da-da-da.
Yeah.
Da-da-da.
Everybody knows that one.
Yeah.
Do we know that one?
Oh, sure.
I didn't
Yeah.
recognize Gilbert's version of
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Well, that's the way it should have been sung.
My Baby Loves Lovin' by White Plains.
My baby loves love.
That's
My
right.
baby loves love.
There you go. There's some serious rock music journalism for you. I hope you enjoyed that. All right, then. Now, speaking really of good rock journalism and historical cataloging of the lives of very important figures, let's jump to an article from July 1997 called The Ed Sullivan Show Reconsidered. Yes, it's by Nick Tosches. Starts out like this. Joe E. Lewis, whose wit outlived his liver, put it best. Ed Sullivan was a man who could brighten a room simply by leaving it. What Sullivan did, Fred Allen claimed, could be done by a pointer dog if meat were rubbed on the performers. But don't mind the peanut gallery. Reliable Ed, as stiff and graceless as an undertaker, stood stage center for nearly a quarter century as the master of ceremonies of cathode ray civilization. At first glance, there is no explaining this flat-lipped, rather charmless creature, the antithesis of the glib, confessional, and slickly professional smilers who would follow his lead on talk shows, game shows, beauty pageants, and other familiar formats. Down-to-earth Ed was a dose of sensible glitter, a solid salesman, an uncle drafted unexpectedly to serve the good cause of entertainment. Says Alan King, who appeared on his show 37 times. When I was rolling with Ed, everybody said, "Can you explain Ed Sullivan?" I said, "I don't know what he does, but he seems to do it better than anybody else." Yet no better than Mr. and Mrs. Ordinary American could imagine doing it themselves. Maybe that explains why, between 1948 and 1971, like nothing and no one before or since, Ed Sullivan was a really big show. Maybe the biggest in television history. He was the god of Sunday night, the man who brought old-timers their last fond glimpses of vaudeville, and who gave teeny boppers their first excited look at the Beatles. Transcending class distinctions, embracing and accommodating all generations. Ed's taste was America's too. From plate spinners to patriots reciting mezzo-sopranos to mouse puppets, Mrs. Miller to soft shoe, pas de deux, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, comics kvetching, and beauties with balloons braving flying arrows. Sullivan was no slouch at understanding just whom we wanted there in our living rooms, right up next to the dogs and the kids. And what we wanted, he provided pronto, be it lion tamers or Sinatra, Pagliacci, or the Moscow Circus, a one-legged tap dancer or the Doors. To be seen with Sullivan Sunday night was to be a star Monday morning. To be called over to shake Ed's hand was to connect with the brightest lights in the big room. Still, he was a guy the smarties liked to razz. A Broadway Nixon with sweat streaming down his forehead. Maybe it was his inadequacies that endeared him to a nation weary of smoothies and swindlers. Maybe it was the fact that he kept his distance, and he tensed up when people got close, as we did then. The choice of Ed Sullivan as master of ceremonies seems ill-advised, wrote Jack Gould of the New York Times in the summer of 1948, after the second broadcast of the series. John Crosby of the New York Herald was less circumspect. Under the headline, Why, he wrote, "One of the small but vexing questions confronting anyone in this area with a television set is, why is Ed Sullivan on it every Sunday night?" In those early days, because of his golem-like manner, there arose among viewers the mistaken belief that he had a metal plate in his head. I received hundreds of letters congratulating me on my courage in continuing despite such a handicap, Sullivan recalled. Others applauded his triumph over Bell's palsy. Maladroit and malaprop, his faux pas were legion but familiar. They became American family jokes, and were the kind of embarrassing slip your pop might make at the Kiwanis Club. Irving Berlin, who would outlive Sullivan, was referred to as the late Irving Berlin. Clarinetist Benny Goodman was a trumpeter. Roberta Sherwood was Roberta Peters. Barbara Streisand became Barbara Streisand, off camera. A group of Samoans were presented as Samoans from Samoa, while a group of native New Zealanders became the fierce Maori tribe from New England. Robert Merrill was greeted with the words, "I'd like to prevent Robert Merrill." Dolores Gray was welcomed as one of the fine singing stars of Broadway, now starving at the Alvin Theater. A closing plug for a drive to fight tuberculosis emerged as "Good night and help stamp out TV." One week, when his sponsor was Kent Cigarettes, under fire for advertising to minors, and the company's advertising agency, Lennon and Newell, had carefully placed its commercials in segments appealing to older audiences. Sullivan prefaced vaudeville trooper Blossom Seeley's appearance with, "Before all of you young people can see a veteran in action, here's a word from Kent Cigarettes." Jack Carter told me of a night when Sullivan, indulging his custom of recognizing distinguished audience members, asked a paraplegic to please stand and take a bow. Something most characteristic was Sullivan's urging, "Let's hear it for the Lord's Prayer," upon forgetting the name of Sergio Franchi on the 1965 Christmas show. Television was, from inception, in its electric womb, such an incubus of the masses that many regarded it as civilization's end. The very word repulsed T.S. Eliot, who declared it ugly. Its welding of Greek and Latin roots, a mark of ill breeding. The thing itself, he warned in 1950, was a habitual form of entertainment. Jack Carter blows him away. Television, he tells me, was the box they buried show business in. Fitting, then, that its first and foremost ringmaster came across more like a pallbearer than a showman. Yet, paradoxically, he also ushered into the world new generations of razzmatazz. Featuring acts from Durante to Wayne and Schuster, a pair of Canadian comics, could there possibly be two? His was the stage where stardom was conferred. Everyone, it seemed, who dwelled in or passed, however fleetingly, through the light of celebrity appeared on one or more of his 1,087 shows. A mere sampling of the names is staggering. Cut and cut again, it still produces the following scroll. Woody Allen, Louis Armstrong, Fred Astaire, Gene Autry, Lucille Ball, The Band, Tallulah Bankhead, Bridget Bardot, Lionel Barrymore, Count Basie, The Beach Boys, Tony Bennett, Irving Berlin, Eubie Blake, Humphrey Bogart, Marlon Brando, James Brown, Richard Burton, The Byrds, Sid Caesar, James Cagney, Maria Callas, Cab Calloway, Johnny Cash, Fidel Castro, Ray Charles, Montgomery Clift, George M. Cohan, Nat King Cole, Perry Como, Bill Cosby, Bing Crosby, Salvador Dali, Rodney Dangerfield, Bobby Darin, James Dean, Jack Dempsey, Fats Domino, Peter Duchin, Clint Eastwood, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Duke Ellington, Clark Gable, Judy Garland, Ira Gershwin, Jackie Gleason, Cary Grant, Alec Guinness, Bill Haley and his Comets, Oscar Hammerstein II, W.C. Handy, Alfred Hitchcock, Judy Holliday, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, John Huston, The Ink Spots, Harry James, Jefferson Airplane, Gene King, B.B. King, Rashawn Roland Kirk, Gene Krupa, Burt Lair, Dorothy L'Amour, Burt Lancaster, Mario Alonzo, London Lee, Jerry Lewis, Joe E. Lewis, Liberace, Sonny Liston, Sophia Loren, Moms Mabley, Jane Mansfield, Ross Key Marciano, Willie Mays, the McGuire sisters, Yehudi Menuhin, Glenn Miller, Robert Mitchum, Ogden Nash, Paul Newman, Rudolph Nureyev, Merle Overton, Gregory Peck, Itzhak Perlman, Edith Piaf, The Platters, Cole Porter, Perez Prado, Richard Pryor, George Raft, Johnny Ray, Ronald Reagan, Jeremy Robbins, Bill Bojangles Robinson, Eleanor Roosevelt, Babe Ruth, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, Carol Sandburg, Albert Schweitzer, Gene Seberg, Ravi Shankar, Dinah Shore, Frank Sinatra, The Supremes, Elizabeth Taylor, The Three Stooges, Margaret Truman, Sophie Tucker, Ike and Tina Turner, Lana Turner, the Vienna Boys Choir, Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, fuck yeah, Betsy von Furstenberg, John Wayne, Orson Welles, Billy Wilder, Tennessee Williams, Henny Youngman, Daryl F. Zanuck. And that's a good place to stop this episode. Oh, there's so much more. There's 20 pages of this article. And we will get back to it like we will the Altamont book and some probably Beatlesy stuff and some, actually, probably Crosby, Stills, and Nash & Young. And I want to take a detour into Jim Marshall, creator of the Marshall Amplifier, as well as some maybe Leo Fender's history with the electric guitar, things like that. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. It helps me stay sane to know that buying all these books over the last 3 years or more, in some cases, is not a waste of time. And someone will listen to me talk about them and listen to me talk about rock and roll. I appreciate you so much for being here. Thanks for giving a shit about rock and roll, and thanks for giving a shit about people's lives and stories and books. Have a good one. Get out there, kick some ass, have fun, poop, fart, sleep. repeat.